Good afternoon, everybody.
Hello,
Welcome to Deleted Scenes. I am Pastor Jack, and he is.
Pastor Matt.
And this is where we dive deeper into the sermon from the most recent Sunday. And so we're talking about the Transfiguration today, and my audio is muted. So a very deep subject. The questions almost wrote themselves this week.
Yep.
And it wasn't necessarily Matt saying, hey, ask these questions, or me saying, I'm going to ask these questions. It was just like, these questions are here, and they're available, and we're going to talk about them.
These are the questions.
These are the questions that are involved with this subject.
Yeah.
Because it is wild, it is vast, and I definitely don't understand a whole lot about it. I know he understands more about it than I do, so I'm kind of excited to ask some questions that I might not necessarily know much about. So
this one is probably the most legit deleted scenes episode we've ever done because it's going to be so many things that got deleted from the sermon.
Yeah.
Also, if you're wondering, we are coming to you live from Mount Tabor. That's what's in the distance there. That is the most common candidate that people propose to be the actual mountain where the Transfiguration happened. You'll have, if you're from the Northwest like we are, obviously you have to alter your definition of mountain a little bit.
Yeah.
But, they went to the top of the mountain. You can't really just walk to the top of the mountains we have around here like Mount Hood. So I guess it's fair.
Yeah.
But that's
well, I like to think of it, maybe some of the people won't really know, but Mount Pisgah in Eugene, it's not like a mountain. It's something that you hike in like an afternoon.
Yeah.
It's like got pretty views and stuff like that. I imagine that's pretty similar to what it was. Like
yeah.
You do it, and it is a hike. Like you're walking uphill for a significant portion of time, so you're probably stuck in swamp water at some point. But so that's just the way I like to think of something like that. But,
yeah.
Definitely is more so a hill than anything else. But
yep.
So yeah.
And I think we have fixed our connectivity problem.
Yeah.
Because I haven't had an issue.
All right.
Cool.
That's exciting. We appreciate your patience with us as we figure out technology. It's one of the things that people ask me as a joke all the time. Did you have a class in Bible college on doing ministry during a pandemic, or did you have a class in Bible college that was dedicated to live streaming something? I was like, no,
nope.
That's just something that you were kind of figuring out on the fly, and so that's.
Turns out my computer was sending the signal to Chicago when it should have been sending it to Seattle.
Yeah,
that was the problem. Who knew?
Yeah,
and fixed.
Those miles, they'll get you.
Yep.
They'll get you, man. So the way this is going to work is I have several questions for Pastor Matt that we're going to discuss. You can also comment any questions that you might have for him, and we'll get those answered for you as well. So without further ado.
And that's true if you're watching live on YouTube as well. They're both live now.
They are both live. I'm trying to pay attention to both of them.
Well, I got YouTube if you got Facebook.
Sure, yeah. So that's the way it's going to work. You can comment any questions that you have for Pastor Matt in the comments section of both Facebook and YouTube. And I have the questions for Matt that will kind of keep us going. So
yes.
There were several things that you talked about on Sunday where you said, we don't have enough time to talk about why this is happening in this specific way. And so I just have a whole bunch of these notes of just 2 words with a question mark at the end of it, right?
Yeah.
And so the first one is face shining ?
Yeah.
Because you said that this was happening for a specific reason or something or other. We just didn't have time to talk about it.
Well, I said that it's its own bunny trail that goes into a rabbit hole.
Yes.
So the idea of the face shining is the most obvious connection that it makes is with Moses. When Moses went up after the golden calf and he went up and spent 40 days on the mountain with God, he came back and his face was shining because he had spent time in God's presence. And that seems to be the most frequent connection with this shining. It's the idea of you are so close with God that you are it's like glow in the dark material. It has to spend a certain amount of time in the light, and then when you take it in the dark, it glows. I think that's kind of a good metaphor for it. So Moses is one good connection, but actually you can rewind it farther. There's a really interesting connection that I only thought of today, which is, do you know the first time that God delegates authority in his creation?
I should know this.
Not necessarily.
Yeah, well.
I know.
I'm not recalling it off the top of my head.
Well, so you would think it would be when he creates humanity on day 6, because who else is there to delegate authority? Well, actually, the first time he delegates authority is when he delegates authority to the sun, moon, and stars. One light to rule over the day and one light to rule over the night, and then they govern the seasons. So I think that might be part of the idea of the shining aspect, that they share in God's authority by sharing in his light. There's a lot of language in Isaiah about Israel shining a light and that being their job as God's representatives in the world. Of course, Jesus picks that up when he says, "You are the light of the world." We also have that there's a connection with in Daniel, it talks about the resurrection where they will shine like the sun. And then you can trace that all the way to Revelation, when at the end it talks about the fact that there's no sun in the new creation because God and his people are basically the light source. So there's this long train of references throughout the Old and New Testament where beings that shine, and I guess that also includes angels, are people who are working with God, his representatives. They are just so in sync with what he's doing that they share in his glory and his light.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's what Jesus is tapping into in that image.
Yeah. Reminds me of the children's song, "This Little Light of Mine."
Yes. I'm going to let it shine. Won't let Satan it out.
Yeah. Also started thinking about the MLK quote. Right? It is MLK that says, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that."
I think so.
Yeah.
Although I'm sure Facebook attributes that to all kinds of people.
Probably, yeah. So, all right. So my next coupling of words with a question mark is white clothes ?
Yes, white clothes. So Jesus' clothes turn white, and it says that Mark says they turn whiter than anyone could actually bleach them. Which again, I love that reference. I remember a joke that we used to make when the Two Towers came out about Gandalf the White and how he found the last bottle of bleach in Middle Earth because he's just so white.
Sure.
White clothes are also a reference that go throughout the Bible. There's pure white clothes are what the priests are meant to wear. I mean, you talked about that. There's pure white clothes that are involved in that. There's also angels. So the image that we have of angels, I forget if we've talked about this in deleted scenes, of a person with wings never happens once in the entire Bible. The angels typically are normal looking people dressed in white. And sometimes they shine and sometimes they don't, but they tend to be dressed in white. And then in Revelation, again, that image of white clothing comes up, and it's the idea of purity, moral purity. And so there's talking about people like the people who are faithful throughout the tribulation. They end up with white clothes, and there's an idea of them being washed by Jesus. And so that imagery of white clothing seems to indicate moral purity and just being without blemish, without imperfection, that kind of thing.
Sure, yeah. All right, so another coupling of words with a question mark is why them? And why them in reference to Elijah and Moses, who appeared with Jesus and talked with him. So why these two guys?
So I talked in the sermon about how oftentimes we think of this moment as a revelation of Jesus being God, and that's not what it's about. There are other ways that we can tell Jesus is God from the New Testament, and some that link back to the Old Testament, but that's not what the Transfiguration is about. And so one of the ways that people will interpret that when they think that it's talking about Jesus being God is they'll say, Moses and Elijah represent the Old Testament and the Old Revelation, and Jesus is the New Revelation. So, because the Old Testament, the Jews would call it the Law and the Prophets. So the Law was the first 5 books of the Bible, and then basically all the other prophetic books and history books in the Old Testament they called the prophets. There's a third part, and there's no Solomon to represent the Proverbs and stuff like that. So I'm not sure that it really represents the Old Testament. The other problem is that Elijah isn't a writing prophet. He didn't write any words. So they don't seem to represent that the Bible. And I think that really comes from our mindset where we are super obsessed with the Bible being on a pedestal, and I don't think that's quite how the Bible talks about itself in quite that way. But anyway, What's more likely, the reason why it's talking about Moses and Elijah is because of what Moses and Elijah have in common with Jesus in that moment and what Jesus is about to experience. Because both Moses and Elijah had mountaintop experiences with the presence of God at Mount Sinai. So we talked a bit about Moses going up to the mountain. Later on in 1 Kings 19, Elijah, after the whole Mount Carmel thing, Jezebel tries to kill him, so he goes on the run, and he runs to Mount Sinai, and he has an encounter with God's presence there. And the other thing they have in common, not only is it that they have mountaintop experiences with God, but they are, in those moments, they are like the only faithful person out of the Israelites at the time. You know, Moses is up on the mountain with God during the calf incident, the golden calf incident. When Elijah goes up on Mount Sinai, he says, I am the only one left who's really following you. So they also represent people who are faithful when God's people have turned their backs. And that really points toward the moment of the crucifixion when Jesus is the only real faithful Israelite at that time.
Sure.
Now, my wife has a theory that I think is brilliant, so I want to make sure and give Casey full credit. Her theory is that there is time travel involved, so that when Moses and Elijah go up on the mountaintops to experience God, they actually end up traveling through time to the Transfiguration. So when you're reading in Exodus and in 1 Kings 19 and in the Transfiguration, those are all like stories that link up throughout time, which I think is a really clever and cool idea. I think that would be awesome if that were the truth.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. So kind of building off this subject, now that we kind of know the why, what did they talk about?
So Mark doesn't tell us what they talk about. Matthew doesn't tell us what they talk about. Luke gives us a little bit. And one of the things they must have done is they must have said something that indicates who they are. Because it's not like they wore name tags. But when Peter speaks to them, he knows who Moses and Elijah are. So something about what they were saying must have given away who they are. Luke says something interesting. In Luke, it says, they appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. Now, first thing about that verse, that also helps us understand that this is not about Jesus being God, because Moses and Elijah apparently were in glory too. So they were also shining. Yeah. So whatever the shining means, it also has to be true of Moses and Elijah. But it says they were speaking of his departure. The interesting thing there is that in that word is the Greek word exodus. So he's talking with Moses about his exodus that he's going to accomplish in Jerusalem. So they're talking about what's going to happen in Passion Week. Yeah. And they're talking about it as an exodus, as a way of rescuing God's people out of slavery. Yeah. In this case, slavery to sin. So that's all we get. And I really wish there was a transcript of that conversation. Yeah. You asked me, I think it was last week, or one of your questions for me was, who would you want to sit down and have a dinner with? You know, like this is like the top choice, right? Like the top three. Yeah. Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. If you want any of your questions answered, and we have no transcript. Yep. A real failure of our eyewitnesses there. Or maybe we're just not meant to know. Yeah.
I kind of lean towards that we're just not really meant to know, you know? I mean, what's in the Bible is in the Bible for a specific reason.
Well, Luke does say that the disciples woke up to this. And you know, I have a hard time remembering things when I'm just waking up. So yep. I guess that's fair.
I'm definitely not a morning person. So every morning when I get into work, I'm like, let me do a few things first and just kind of get my mind right. Yep. And then we'll do the stuff that matters. You know, it's like,
you'll get the light stuff at the
beginning of the day. Check my email, see if I've got any of those, and just kind of do some, you know, lollygagging around for a few minutes. Yep. So don't forget, you can ask any questions that you might have in the comments section. This is not just a time where Pastor Matt and I just talk amongst ourselves. We want to include you in the conversation too. So ask whatever questions you might have in those comment sections on Facebook or YouTube. So the next one I have is actually not a coupling of words. It's one single word with a question mark. Okay. And I'm hesitating to remember why I wrote this down, but I know it's because of something you said. Okay. It's just tense question mark.
Oh, why does Peter offer to build them tents?
Oh yeah, the tent. Yep.
So So we're not sure, and I don't think it really matters. Like, I think it was just gibberish. Like, he's like, hey, let's hang out here. Actually, my boss when I was in Enterprise, Dave Bruce, gave a great message at camp, at the end of a camp, using this, talking about how they were having a literal mountaintop experience, and Peter just wanted to stay there.
Yeah.
But you can't stay there. You have to go home.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what camp is like. You never want to go home from camp. You want to just stay on that mountaintop experience. But the whole point is to go home. I think that is a great application of the passage. In terms of what's actually going on, there is a theory that this is happening during the Feast of Tabernacles. And so Peter wants to celebrate tabernacles with them. There's also a theory that Peter thinks that they're going to set up base camp on this mountain to, like, they're going to start building the kingdom from there. Those are possibilities, but I think the main interpretive point is it's gibberish. It's like just a silly thing that's clearly unnecessary. Like Moses and Elijah just appeared out of thin air. They don't need Peter to build. He actually says it's a good thing we're here so we can do this. Like like Jesus is capable of summoning Elijah and Moses, but not of pitching a tent.
Yeah.
Like, it's just silly.
Yeah. I think on Sunday I was a little bit confused as to what exactly you were saying by that, but I think I understand it more now, because I've definitely been in situations where I've said something like, we could do this, and everyone's like, I mean, we could, but that's not necessary. That's not, I don't need that to happen in this moment right now. It's like, oh, okay, yeah.
That's fair.
That's fair. Let's move on from this. Like, let's forget I even said anything like this ever.
Yeah.
And move forward, right?
Yep.
So, I get it a little bit more now. So, all right, my next question for you has to do with this idea of at the Transfiguration, Jesus received glory, honor, and authority from the Father. And so I wanted to ask, hasn't Jesus received authority before, or is God kind of doubling down in a sense with this, giving Jesus authority again?
Yeah, so that is a really good question, and your instincts are very good, because what God says at the Transfiguration is almost verbatim what he says at the baptism. In Mark chapter 1, when Jesus gets baptized, it says, a voice came from heaven. You are my beloved Son, with you I am well pleased. And so it's like the same references, the same Psalms and everything. And so I think that it's not doubling down. There's definitely, Jesus receives the Spirit in his baptism. So he clearly does receive authority there. But I think that this is a special anointing, a special choosing for what Jesus is about to do, because there's a way he talks to Moses and Elijah about the crucifixion.
Yeah.
And in Mark, on their way down, he tells them, don't tell anybody about this until the crucifixion or until the resurrection. So there's definitely a connection there. And I think it's more saying, it's like God saying, now that Jesus has done 3 years of ministry, saying, yep, he's still the guy. This is what I wanted him to do. We talk about how Jesus earned that position by being, by showing godly character. So at the baptism, God equips him, and then at the Transfiguration, he verifies it. Like he vindicates, says, yep, this is what I wanted him to do. He's doing the right thing, and now I'm sending him to Jerusalem. Yeah. So I don't think it's necessarily an increase or like a doubling down, but it's just a verifying. It's a showing that Jesus hasn't gone off the path.
Sure. Yeah. All right. So my next question has to do with this idea of Transfiguration is a journey that begins in this life. And I just wanted to ask, is it possible for us to reach the end of this journey in this life, or is this only something that can be reached kind of after this life?
I would say that, perfection is something that would happen in eternity. I would think, I would hesitate. I would be very skeptical of anyone who says they've achieved it in this life. The interesting thing is, in the Eastern Church, the Orthodox Church, so this would be the church that from Greece and Russia and Egypt and Syria and that part of the world that grew up out of there, they really emphasize this tradition, and they call it theosis, the idea of becoming like God. And they actually have a tradition about really saintly people starting to glow. And I'm not saying that's necessarily true, but it definitely fits in with that mindset. So for us in the Catholic tradition in the West, you have really saintly people. They get the stigmata, which is the wounds of Christ. So I think it's St. Francis of Assisi is the first one to receive it. And whether it's real or not, I don't know. But the idea is that they start bleeding from the wounds of Christ. So they're like reenacting the crucifixion.
Yeah.
In the Eastern Church, the idea is you reenact the Transfiguration and you start to shine. And they'll talk about like a hermit's in his cell and you can see light coming out through the door. I don't think that that's necessarily what we're meant to be striving for, the glowing part.
Yeah.
I think that I have definitely met people who are a lot closer in this life than I am. So I don't think we should ever say we can't get there, because there's always more we can do.
Yeah.
And I'm hesitant to give us permission to stop short of the goal. I think we need to keep striving toward the goal and get as far as God will empower us to get.
Sure.
Knowing that we will complete it in eternity.
Yeah.
Or he will complete it in us.
It gives a whole new perspective to saying you're glowing to somebody.
Yeah.
Because
that's good. I like
anyway,
that.
So you kind of touched on this idea of it, being a journey and kind of being somewhere where we reach. Do they fall back in this journey sometimes and then still have to make up, or would that kind of be considered part of their journey to kind of going upwards?
I think that we absolutely backslide. I mean, we use that term backsliding for a reason. I think that's a pretty good comparison. So I think that you could say as we go up, and if you've ever climbed a really steep mountain, that happens. Yeah. You actually do slide, or you just get tired and you sit, or you have really slow patches, or you have a rock slide. Things happen, and I think those metaphors really all carry over to what our lives look like. And so to say that our journey is always going up is not to say that things only ever get better. Mm-hmm. But like climbing a mountain, when you're moving forward, you're only moving up. Yeah. We never move forward in God and go down. And I think that's the point, is that there's always room to go up in our life with God, no matter where we're at in our lives. I heard from a couple of people, and I have to say I got it from one of the books on the Transfiguration that I read. I heard from a couple of people who are retired that appreciated the idea that even if you're older and you don't seem to have much potential left anymore, there's still more to do. You still have more to grow, and it still matters. Yeah. I found that really meaningful in the book that I should have brought it with me to show you, because it wasn't me. But I think that's really meaningful and helpful.
Definitely. So don't forget, you can comment any questions that you have for Pastor Matt in the comments section. Carrying forward here, you kind of touched a little bit on the Eastern Church. I just want to ask, is there anything more that you'd like to discuss from the Eastern Church and their perspective on the Transfiguration?
Yeah, so I know Americans aren't really, especially Protestants and really evangelicals, aren't familiar with the Eastern Orthodox Church. So there was one church in the beginning, and then around the 500s, the 500 AD, the Roman Empire split into East and West, and then the churches started developing differently, and in 1099 AD, they split. So you had the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, and then Protestants broke off from the Catholics. So that's where they come from. And for them, the Transfiguration is this really important moment in understanding who Christians are called to be. And they have this phrase, I'm going to say it, and your Protestant bells, like warning bells, will go off. Like it's clearly like your heresy bells start to ring, especially if you grew up in an area near Mormonism. The phrase is, God became man so that man can become God. Oh, yeah. Right? That sets off your warning bells. But that's because of the baggage. They don't mean I can become God himself, or even a God the way we would think of Zeus or something. But there is a sense that we are supposed to become gods the way the Old Testament talks about gods being beings that have God's authority. And so that's really powerful for them. My favorite thing about the Eastern Orthodox tradition is they use icons for worship. So they have these traditional ways of depicting events in the Bible, and you use those to reflect and to meditate. And I have one of these images of the Transfiguration, and there's a brilliant detail that one of my professors in seminary pointed out about the way they depict the Transfiguration. So this is an icon of the Transfiguration, and you will notice the three disciples at the bottom, they tend to be depicted the same way. The bottom left, you can tell, is Peter because his mouth is open and he's about to say something. And Peter always has his mouth open because he's always talking.
He's always got something to say.
Yep. On the right, you see James, and James has his face covered. And James is pretty much always covering his face, almost all the time covering his face. And then John is the one kind of in the middle without the beard. And John is usually depicted about to throw up. You can see him kind of heaved over.
Yeah.
And in others, he's got his hand in front of his mouth like he's about to puke. And that's a traditional way of depicting the Transfiguration, is it being so intense that, James can't look. John is about to puke, but Peter still has something he wants to say.
That tells you everything you need to know about Peter,
yep,
really.
Yep. But I just think that really makes it human, and I love that tradition. Yeah. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So that's the icons.
All right. Very cool. Very cool. So yeah, don't forget you can comment any questions that you might have in the comments section. I have only a couple more questions for you, and they're kind of intertwined in a way. And so this last question I have is: was Jesus in a process of being transformed in his life? And if not, what does that look like for him? And kind of how is sin related to this process?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question, because you're right. When we talk about Transfiguration as a journey, then you have to ask, does that mean Jesus had to journey because he's supposed to be perfect all the time? Mm-hmm. And I think that we need to change the way we think of perfection, I guess. Or Transfiguration is not just a matter of getting rid of sin. You need to get rid of sin, but Transfiguration is a positive thing to accomplish as well. It's not a matter of remaining neutral. It's not as if you start out transfigured and as you sin, you lose it. And so as you get rid of sin, then you're transfigured. Transfiguration is not just getting rid of sin, but it's actually obeying God and participating in his mission and actively doing things. And so Jesus achieves his journey to Transfiguration is not a journey from being sinful to being perfect. It's a journey of fulfilling God's will, right? God has things that he wants his Messiah to do, and as Jesus accomplishes those things, he is fulfilling the will of God, and he is on that journey.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of, it's not that Jesus has to deal with sin in his life, it's that he has to live out the mission that God has for him. And I think too often we as Christians just think the goal is to not have any sin in our accounts. And it actually connects with what we talked about with Simon the Pharisee. The point isn't just to not have sin in your life. The point is to use your life to achieve the mission of God.
Sure.
And so with that's why with Transfiguration, Peter in 1 Peter, he doesn't just say get rid of these vices. He says develop these virtues. It's not enough to not do bad. You have to do good. Now, doing good means getting rid of the bad, which is why sin is the enemy of Transfiguration.
Yeah.
But you have to not just erase the sin, not just deal with the sin, but replace it with virtues that cause you to obey God and to build his kingdom here.
Sure. Yeah. That gets really deep into a lot of different things with Jesus, I feel. One of the subjects that's been close to my heart recently is, kind of the night of the Last Supper, as Jesus is being betrayed, and the prayer on the Mount of Olives, right? Just the way that seems, because I thought about this when you're talking about how this is kind of God's confirmation of Jesus is the person that's going to carry this out. The Mount of Olives seems to be the moment where Jesus decides to go through with it, and I just think that's really powerful in saying God's will is central to Jesus's mission in his life, and that's the point where it gets hardest for him to choose God's will, but he says, I still know I got to do it, and he decides to do it. So I think that's kind of cool talking about God's will in that way.
Yeah, exactly. That is a really good story to connect that, because it reminds us the only way it makes sense if Jesus says, not my will, but yours be done, is if there's a difference,
Mm-hmm.
right? What means that Jesus would rather not get crucified.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I cannot,
Yeah.
sometimes we think of Jesus as this completely inhuman, just serene person who just floats to the cross,
Yeah,
you know, and
yeah.
it's not a big deal. He does not want to go.
Mm-hmm.
He would rather do anything but get crucified,
Yeah.
right? He does it because he wants to achieve the goal and he wants to be obedient. And that's why he says, hey, if there's any other way we can achieve the goal,
Yep.
please, let's choose plan B.
Yeah.
If we have to, I will do this.
Yeah.
And that's him obeying God. And yeah, that's the culmination of his transfiguration journey in a way.
Yeah. Yep. And God strengthens him in that moment too, which I always find interesting. Of like,
Yeah.
when you choose God's will, God is going to strengthen you to accomplish his will. So
Yeah.
and that's a really good example of that.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, so that kind of concludes all of my on-topic questions.
Okay.
Can you think of anything I'm missing here with the Transfiguration?
I mean, you know, we could spend hours and like every one of those deleted scenes could be an entire sermon conversation.
Yeah.
But at this point, that's all I can think of.
Okay.
Maybe if we end up with a bunch of questions later, we can do a sequel or something.
Yeah.
But
deleted scenes 2.0 Transfiguration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't even finish the book that I bought to help me prepare for this. I still need to, but it's a deep, deep well.
It is a very deep well. So I have one last question. It's a random question. This is the time I like to give you to ask any kind of final questions that you might have online here in the comment section. So this random question here I have for you, Pastor Matt, is what was the last movie that you saw that you just could not stand? Like you hated it. It was repulsive to you. And why?
I don't know. That's hard. Repulsive?
I mean, maybe not.
Can I say
necessarily
disappointed?
Disappointing, yeah. I mean, I guess I have one if disappointing comes up in my mind.
I'm trying to think. Well, okay, the Rise of Skywalker.
Okay.
The last Star Wars movie, that was a disappointment. I thought that The Last Jedi was so interesting in the way it ended that it set them up for a really interesting episode 9.
Yeah.
And I genuinely didn't know how they were going to wrap it up. And I thought I could have been wrong about this trilogy. It could be really good.
Mm-hmm.
And then they made it as if The Last Jedi never happened. Like in the first 5 minutes, they undo all the really interesting things about about The Last Jedi. Super disappointed.
Yeah.
The other one, and Casey and I agree on this, Wonder Woman.
Interesting. Okay.
I went in there wanting to really like Wonder Woman, and Casey really wanted, and it had some really cool moments, but it wasn't as well written as I was hoping. There were just some things about it where he's like, oh, well, that's kind of
yeah.
Okay. You know, it's a bit of a letdown.
That's fair. That makes sense. I like Wonder Woman. I mean, I just really like Gal Gadot because I think she's an amazing actress, and the fact that she was pregnant during shooting that movie was pretty impressive, and I just think she's a great person all around. So I like it because of that, but it wasn't really a remarkable movie.
Well, I think it was because Casey and I wanted more from it, and he's like, okay, it's all right.
Yeah.
But
my disappointing movie would be the Mulan live action remake.
Oh yeah.
There's
no singing.
Good. There was no singing.
No.
The storyline was like so far from what it was in the original. It wasn't good. So live action Aladdin, I really liked that.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite ones.
I heard you had the soundtrack playing during youth group.
Part of it anyway. So which Star Wars movie was it where there's like this speeder or whatever, and it's like dragging on the ground, so there's this like red like rooster
That's
tail.
The Last Jedi.
That's The Last Jedi.
Yeah,
I remember that being a really, really beautiful scene.
Yes,
though.
it was
it's
very
really
visually. Yeah.
So.
Fun fact: Star Wars the Star Wars series is one of the best mimics of the way the Bible tells stories.
Interesting. If
you want to learn, I have some fascinating books about how biblical narratives work, and Star Wars does a lot of the same things. So, like for instance, the Bible will tell stories in similar ways. So there's like certain scenes where I could describe the scene to you, and you could name me like 4 times that it happens.
Yeah.
You know, like a person's spouse is found at a well. That happens to Jacob. It happens to Isaac. It happens to Moses. And then there's a spin on it when Jesus meets the Samaritan woman at the well. You know, like scenes like that.
Yeah.
And Star Wars does the same thing. Like if we say that there's a group of pilots who have to blow up the super weapon that you know, that happens like 5 times.
Yep.
So that's Star Wars is actually a good way to learn how to read the Bible.
So Star Wars is a translation of the Bible.
About as faithful as the Passion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. So we just let you into a little bit of our personal conversation right there.
Yeah.
You know, I guess we could have cut it off a few minutes ago and just talked about this. But
internet is free.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. It was a lot of fun. I don't see any other questions here. So join us next Wednesday as we will
That's
be
right.
here. Next Wednesday.
Not Thursday.
This time, 3 o'clock next Wednesday is when we will be doing deleted scenes because it's spring break and I am going home to see my family. So I'm going to go hang out with them on Thursday. So
whoa, we got some questions.
Well, this is a message.
Oh, never mind.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
So
and actually, it's going to be a surprise. The topic of this sermon is a surprise.
Ooh.
No, I'm sorry. It's a secret. We had the surprise witness a few weeks ago. This week, it's the secret witness.
Okay. Interesting.
So tune in on Sunday to find out, and then on Wednesday to find out more.
Yes. There you go. All right. So see you then, or at least we hope to see you then. So in the meantime, I'm Pastor Jack, and he is
Pastor Matt. Stay healthy, stay hopeful, and go in peace to love and serve the Lord.